In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst. You know, when you're little and you play a game, or even if you've seen children play a game, or demonstrate a skill around other children, there's always something that happens, and it's a very interesting thing that happens. It's the "I can do this better than you can" syndrome, right? You see somebody jump from this point to the next point, and the next child immediately comes up and says, "I can jump farther than that, watch me." Right? And where they say the famous last words of every redneck is, "Watch this," right? As they fall off a roof or do something to push the limits of whatever ability they think they might have. And you see that in children, but I don't think necessarily that it goes away as people age. And I will tell you a story where the names and the faces have been changed to preserve the identity of the victims, where there is a man who was hired for a company, and he's a rather tall man. He's actually 6'7". This is a real human being, right? 6'7". He gets hired at this company. He goes in to meet the CEO of one of the divisions of the company. He goes in, he walks in the room, and the CEO looks at him and looks up at him and he says, "How tall are you?" He says, "I'm 6'7". "Did you play ball?" He said, "Yeah, I played college ball and was going to go for the NBA, but changed course." He says, "I bet I could beat you in basketball." And the person looks across the table and sees this man who's older, shorter, heftier, and not in any shape to beat this young 6'7", almost professional basketball player. And he says, I could beat you. No problem. I could take whatever you want to play, we'll go. And the taller person sat down at the chair and said, "Anytime you want to lose your vehicle to me in a basketball game, just let me know." And that was the end of that. But here's the point of this story, which I found was very brazen on both ends, right? You have somebody who's very underskilled, who thinks that they can do something that's beyond their capabilities. And then you have the boldness of someone who just walks in, someone who is clearly a superior and, again, speaks with force back at the person. So it's really kind of a mixed bag of a story. It's a true story, though. My point is, at what point do you realize where you end? And I think that as we look at our lives, we can see the kids fighting over who's going to do something better, right? Anyone who has ever had a child remembers, "Watch this," right? "Watch this." No, watch it now. No, hang on, well, let me try it again. Let me watch it now, right? And you sit there and you're like, okay, when are you going to do whatever you said you were going to do, right? I remember doing that. You want everybody's eyes, "Watch me, because I'm going to do this awesome, and you're never going to see this ever again in your whole lifetime," right? And then all you have to do is put on America's Funniest Home Videos, and you see a bunch of people like that on video falling and everybody laughing at them as they fail in this epic fail. And then you think, well, maturity, wisdom, growth, life experiences, that would get weeded out, right? It doesn't necessarily. People are still saying, "I can do this better than you." And that goes in every aspect of life, too. I can drive a better car than you, or I can have a nicer house than you, or I have a better job than you. My husband or my wife is better looking than you. Whatever, my kids are smarter, or they're cuter. People do that all the time and push themselves as being something that is not. And today's gospel reading is very kind of directs us in the rail of how we need to think of ourselves. We have St. Peter who's in the boat, right? So now rewind a little bit and think about St. Peter. He just heard from his brother, Andrew, who was following St. John, that the Messiah is here. So we're going to follow him. So he calls Peter and says, "We found the one. We found the Messiah." So Peter knows of Christ, but then this interaction that we just heard about in the gospel speaks about Christ coming to the shore and saying, okay, let me get in your boat, and then we'll move out a little bit, I'll talk to the people. And Peter does that. He says, okay, this is the Messiah here. I know what it is, and I know what's happening. And then after that, he says, Christ says to St. Peter, you know what, now just push your boat a little further out. Go into the deep part and put your net down. And St. Peter says, you know what, we tried that, it didn't work, and because you're asking me to do it, I'm going to do it. And then he does it, and they bring the nets in, and they're breaking with all the fish. And then what does St. Peter say? Lord, depart from me, for I am a sinful man. He realized what he could do and what he couldn't do. And he also realized the presence of God in his life, saying, Lord, depart from me because I'm sinful. Not, I bet I could catch more fish than you if I knew where the fish were under the water. He didn't get sassy with Christ. He didn't say, well, you know what? I already did this. I've been fishing my whole life, and I've gone and I know where all the fish are here, and I've already tried it. It's not going to work, so I'm not going to do it. Why waste your time? Why waste my time? I've already done it. He didn't say that either. He didn't say, aren't you the Messiah? I'm the fisherman. I know what I'm doing. Do you really know where the fish are? He doesn't say any of that. He says, I tried it, it didn't work, but I'll do it because you're asking me to. And then he does it, and then they can't even bring in, without this enormous difficulty, all the fish that Christ brought to the net. So we see here that there's a change over from the youthful children trying to outdo each other or trying to show something that's going to be extraordinary to others, from the adults who are arm wrestling for better position, right? Or saying, well, I do this better, or look at me, or whatever the case is, to the attitude that St. Peter had in the boat where he says, okay, what do you want me to do next? And then to understand what he is not. And when I say what he is not, I want you to think about the gospel where it says, without me, without God, you can do nothing. With me, all things are possible. So we have the understanding of St. Peter saying, you know what? I can't do anything. Which is so unlike our attitudes as children, where we say, we can do everything. I can do anything that's possible. And you think about it, the Olympics a couple years ago had the Chinese team. Do you remember that, the Chinese gymnastics team? And do you remember what the scandal was? They were all too young, right? And the kids were like 12 years old. They should have been 16 or whatever the case was. They were all too young. And the reason for that was because they hadn't developed a sense of fear. And because they hadn't developed a sense of fear, they would do things that the average child would not want to do. The average adult, I mean, now we look at things that are like, I'm not going outside, it's icy outside, I'm going to fall, I'm going to break my hip, right? I mean, that's the mentality we get to when we get older. When we're younger, we're like, I'm going to go try and skate on the ice, right? The whole thing was they hadn't developed that sense of fear yet. And the fear in oneself is different than the fear of God. The believing in oneself is significantly the antithesis of believing in God. So, what we learned from the gospel reading today is that as you go through your lives, and as you think you can do whatever you want to do, right? Whatever I put my mind to, I can do. And we think that. We believe it. We're taught that. We're beat on the head with that as students and as children. You keep trying, you keep doing this, and you're going to go here. You need to do A, B, C in order for this to happen. Be nice to your sister, otherwise you're not going to have a family when you grow up. Or study hard in school, or you're going to have a bad job. Or watch what you eat so you don't have an early heart attack. I mean, we're all told if we do something, we're going to have whatever it is that we're trying to do. And the bottom line of that is anyone who has a little seasoning in their life, has a little experience in their life, realizes it doesn't always work that way. The best student in school doesn't always get the good job. The kindest woman or man doesn't always find the right spouse. The best parent doesn't always have the best child. And the healthiest eater is not guaranteed a long life. So what is our life about? It's about understanding that when God comes into our boat, when we come to the shore and we see him and we hear what he says, and how you might say, well, Christ isn't around now, how we hear him. In the gospel readings, in the life of the church, the liturgy, when we hear his words, are we coming forward and saying, come into my boat, tell me what to do? Even though I've been doing this my whole life, even though I've been whatever you are in your life, whether you're a student, whether you're a worker, whether you're retired, whatever it is, to say, you know what, at this point, I understand who Christ is, and I'm asking him to get into my life, get into my boat. And when you come into my boat, I'm going to tell you what I did wrong and how I failed, which in itself is the form of confession, right? St. Peter confesses to Christ, I tried this, it didn't work. But he tried it on his own. He didn't try it with God. And in having God in our boat, we have to understand that when he's in there and he says, do this, we can say, yep, I did this. I ate right my whole life, or I studied hard in school, or I worked to be a good person, and my marriage is off, or my kids are off, or my job is off, or my health is off, and it didn't work. Then when we have Christ in our boat and he says, do this, that's when we see the miraculous nature of God. When we let ourselves go and we say, you know what, I'm not driving the boat anymore. Did St. Peter say, when Christ said, let's go fishing, he didn't say, let's go into this area because I tried over there and there was fish over there, so let's try over there. He didn't do that. He drove the boat, his own boat, in the direction that Christ said. Christ said, let's go in the deep part. Now, everybody knows, if you've ever been in any type of pool, pond, puddle, swimming pool, where's the deepest part of anything? Is in the middle. So go out in the middle. Go where it's the deepest. Where's the deepest part of the ocean? Way in the middle of the ocean, right? It's not on the shore. Go in the middle where I tell you, in the midst of where you think there's nothing, in the midst of the deep part where the fish are probably down low, where your nets won't go. Go into the most difficult part, throw your nets down, and I'll show you what I can do. St. Peter had no idea where he was going. He just said, whatever you say, I'm going to do. Now, how does this apply to us? Well, when we think of our lives, we can't think we have one direction that we're going to go, and that's it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to get to this point, and then I'm going to retire, and then I'm going to buy a place in Florida, and then I'm going to go there, and then I'm going to come back here, and then I'm going to go over there, and then I'm going to watch my kids, and then I have my jewelry set aside for my grandkids, and I have my power tools set aside for my grandsons, and we have all these things that we're like regimented out, and you hear this. And I'm not saying this applies to everybody, but I've heard stories from a lot of you on what your plans are of your life. I have to do this because I have to work hard so that I can get to the next thing and I can get a bigger house or I can pay for this or whatever the case is. And it snowballs and we have all these things lined up. And then what happens? You take one thing out and what happens? It all collapses. You take one little piece out of there and everybody says, oh, my life is a wreck now. Why? Because I lost my job and now I can't pay for my nice car, my house is in jeopardy, I'm not going to be able to put my kids through school, or whatever the case is. You take one out and all of a sudden the house of cards falls. What St. Peter teaches us is go forward in faith, in trust in God, and let him direct your life. Don't come up with the directions that you specifically want outside of praying about the direction. So don't just come up with, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get here, and then I'm going to stand in the back, and I'm going to put my arms up like Rocky in Philadelphia and say, ooh, I did it. I made it to the top of the stairs. It doesn't work that way. Life does not work that way. Anyone who has experienced setbacks in life realizes it's not as easy as we might think it is in making something happen. You know, it's very interesting that when you're a child, you could take a bunch of parts and put them together and say, this is going to be, I'm making a spaceship, right? You take it all together, you get a box, you put the top of the box on, you put your mom's bleach or whatever on the sides, and you think those are rocket boosters, and you're like ready to go, and you're like in there, and you're like, okay, Mom, light it up. I'm going to the moon. And then you could see there's a couple parts missing here. First of all, we don't have thrusters, you don't have, and you're like, well, this should work. It looks like a spaceship to me. It should work. Why doesn't it work? Because we don't have that understanding as a child of what makes our life work. What makes things happen. You know, you look at it and you've ever seen, like if you've had a pet. You know, it's very interesting. I went and did a house blessing once. I don't know if they're here today. I don't see them. Okay, so we'll talk about that house blessing. And I'm going through the house, and they had, it was like a hamster or something. It was, a little hamster in the side. So I go in the thing, and I'm blessing the house, and I'm going through, and they're like, oh, can you bless the hamsters? I'm like, okay. So I bless one hamster. The thing, like, freaks out, with the holy water. And then the other one I bless, and I'm looking at it, it's not moving. So the daughter reaches in there and she grabs, she's like, it's dead. And she's like squeezing it, trying to bring life back to this hamster. And I'm like, oh, he needs some holy water too, even though he's gone. But the thing is, sometimes you have something that's even dead and you're like, this should work. This, it was just alive a couple minutes ago, and why isn't this hamster working, right? And sometimes in our lives, we look at ourselves and we say, why isn't this working? Why am I beating my head against the wall? Why isn't this fixed? Why isn't this better? And the reason for that is not because we need more experience, we need to be rocket scientists, or we need more education, or we need to do hamster CPR. It's we need to let God direct our life. And as St. Peter gave that beautiful example of saying, you know what? I'll let God direct my life. And this icon right here by Costa, point to the one where he's in jail right there. That icon right there is underneath St. Peter and Paul, and that's St. Peter being let out of prison. Now, St. Peter was in prison, but the interesting thing was, when he was in prison, he was asleep. And he's sleeping there, and he's out. Now, everybody's praying for him on the outside that he gets let out of prison. So he's sleeping, he's got the two guards, and he's out. And then what happens? He gets like slapped, and it's the archangel saying, get up, let's go. And he's like, and his chains were off, right? And he's like, let's go now. And they walk right in the midst of the guards. They walk out, the gates open, as it says, the gates open to them. St. Peter walks out, and he's out on the outside, and he's like, is this a dream? And then the angel speaks to him, and then the angel disappears, and he realizes it wasn't a dream. But the whole thing was, he's in jail, and he's kind of like, I'm just going to take a nap. How many of you in jail, if you were in, hopefully you're not in jail, but because it's much different why he was in jail versus why you might be in jail right now. But who would be sitting there sleeping? You'd be praying, get me out of here, get me out of here. And St. Peter's like, oh, it's okay. He came into the boat, he showed me he did all these things. He rose from the dead. I'm not worried. Whatever it is, it is. And it's going to change. But the reason that St. Peter wasn't traumatized during that whole thing was because he said, you know what? God is going to make the difference when he tells me where to go. And that's what happened. And the angel, to me, it's one of the, I don't want to say comical parts of the Bible, but it's pretty funny when you really think about St. Peter and the angel going, wake up, let's go. And what? And he just gets up and goes. This particular gospel reading, the story of St. Peter, is our shake-up. Wake up and let God direct your life. Don't be so hard set on saying, I'm going to do this and I'm going there, because at one moment, everything can change. One diagnosis, it can change. One bad boss, it can change. Anything, it can change. So let God direct your life. And the only way you start to let him do that is prayerfully by asking for help and guidance and saying, Lord, guide me. Show me the way in which I should walk. For to you I lift up my soul, as the psalm says. We lift up our souls to God, we ask him for direction, and he guides us to the deep, where it's scary for us alone, but with him, everything is possible. Amen.